For a broader perspective on the situation, I'm joined now by Kimberly Flowers. She's the director of the Global Food Security Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. Ms. Flowers, first of all, the food crisis that's described by the UN Secretary General in those four countries is largely driven by conflict. Somebody said it was man-made. How would you describe the relationship between conflict and famine?
Well, I would agree. It's no coincidence, of course, that the four countries that are facing famine right now are all conflict-affected states. You know, they're really, famine only exists in countries, or famine does not exist in countries that are democratic and stable. You know, famine is always man-made. And there's a really strong link between just general food insecurity and conflict. You can see food insecurity both as a cause and a consequence, whether you're talking about food prices or weak governance or access or a variety of issues. The two always go hand in hand.
Talk about the cause.
Sure. So food insecurity can cause conflict, particularly in terms of food prices, and particularly in urban areas. So if you look back at the food price crisis that happened in 2007 and 2008, because of the price spikes, there were almost 50 different riots that happened all around the world, and even governments were toppled because of that. And really, that's what sparked the international interest and commitment at the L'Aquila meeting, the G8 meeting back in 2009. And so same thing, you know, if you look at South Sudan, for example, right now, in the last year alone, they've seen food prices upwards of 800%. And when you have that happening, that kind of instability and economic instability, when people are unhappy and they're unable to meet their basic needs, that is just going to exacerbate other economic inequalities.
So at this point, even if the money is raised and the humanitarian crisis in these countries is dealt with in some ways, the conflict is not going to go away. So what has to happen?
Well, I think it has to be a couple of things. I mean, the first thing that you see and need to recognize is that the situation we're in right now is not the norm. We're in a very unique situation. I mean, not only has famine already been declared in South Sudan. Last time we had famine declared anywhere was Somalia in 2011. But you're looking at four countries on the brink. And then you add to that the amount of displaced persons we have more than ever before, and a humanitarian budget stretched other than before, and just the interesting political shifts that we're seeing across the world. It creates some kind of a perfect storm and a big challenge. So even if we were able to raise, the UN needs $4.4 billion just to address the humanitarian concerns in those four countries alone, much less others like Syria and a variety of other places that are suffering some serious food insecurities. What it's really going to take is ending that conflict, and that means political will and diplomatic measures, and keeping countries accountable for themselves and international standards, and that takes a lot of effort as a global community to try to make that happen.
All of this, of course, is happening at a time when, if you look at Western politics, for example, countries tend to be looking, or some countries at least tend to be looking more inward. You talk about food security as being a national security concern, even for countries like the United States and Canada. Mm-hmm. How so?
Well, same thing going back to those food price riots. So the reason that addressing global food insecurity elsewhere in the world addresses our national security concerns is going back to the stability that food security can create. So when you have a healthy population with a stable economy, you've got people eating nutritious food, that's going to create an environment that is stable. But what's happening in terms of food security is also around food being used as a weapon of war. And so you have in a lot of these countries insurgents using food as both a recruitment tool. You have both governments and insurgents using food as an opportunity to starve out different communities. And the more that we can address those kinds of issues, the more that we're going to create stability. And that the national security linkages are just very clear. We want stable economies all around the world. We want economies to be growing and prosperous, and sometimes they're going to need our assistance and help to get there.
I was going to say, how do you sell that idea when so often what motivates people and ultimately motivates government is those dreadful pictures of starving children? That, that politics and political stability somehow isn't as appealing as, or isn't as motivating, put it that way.
Sure. Well, there's also the moral obligation, right? I mean, particularly from the American perspective, when you talk about American values and you talk about, what is the core American belief structure, a lot of that is to help improve lives all around the world. So for those that the national security or economic growth argument doesn't quite stick, but I think it actually normally does, and more so than I think most people imagine, there's also just the moral obligation that we have. Because really, when you look at food, it's a moral right of all people. It's something that's a human right that we all deserve to be fed. And on this planet right now, we have enough food to feed everybody. There is not a dearth of food out there to feed people. It's about access. It's about stability of prices. It's about governance, about conflict, all those things that we've already talked about. But I think the moral argument can stand just as much as the national security, economic, and others.
Thank you very much for your expertise.
Thank you.